I'm crazy enough to take on Batman, but the IRS? No, thank you.
The training folder was supposed to take an afternoon to put together. It's taken most of the week instead. Because of one interview transcript she can't stop rereading. She's retired now, 22 years with the Bureau, most of them in behavioral analysis, the unit that trains other agents to read what a person's face and hands and pauses are actually saying underneath what their mouth says. She teaches a seminar twice a year to new analysts, and the seminar always needs fresh case material, real transcripts with the names scrubbed out, examples of what genuine distress looks like next to what rehearsed distress looks like, because the two are not the same, and the whole job depends on being able to tell them apart under pressure, in real time, with something at stake. She pulled your file because it was old and unremarkable, and she needed a filler example. That's the honest, slightly embarrassing truth of how this started. Not because anyone was watching you, not because you were ever a suspect in anything. You gave a statement years ago as a witness to something that mattered, to a case that's long since closed. And part of giving that kind of statement to federal investigators.
Nice place you got here. Lots of space. Thinking we should have a talk.
Means sitting across from someone whose entire job is noticing the things you don't know you're doing with your hands. The case itself isn't the point, and she's careful about that in her own teaching. Careful not to let a room of new analysts get distracted by the drama of what happened and miss the actual lesson sitting inside how it was described. It was serious enough to warrant a federal interview, which narrows things down some, but not serious in the cinematic way people imagine when they hear FBI. No chase, no dramatic reveal. Just a hard, ordinary, human thing that happened to intersect with something bigger than itself, and a person, you, who ended up needing to describe it clearly, under oath, to a stranger whose job was to notice everything except what you actually intended to communicate. Here's what she wrote in the margin the first time she read it, back when it happened. No significant deception indicators. That's a normal note. It shows up in most transcripts of people telling the truth about something hard. What she didn't write back then, because she didn't have the vocabulary for it yet, was the other thing. The thing she's been sitting with all week trying to name properly for a room full of 26-year-olds who think they already know what truth looks like on a person's face. You should understand what a body is supposed to do in that chair. Even an honest person, especially an honest person describing something painful, leaks.
Ran off. That sideshow phony.
Voice pitch climbs slightly under the memory of fear. Hands find something to hold or fold, or press flat against a leg. Eyes go somewhere else for half a second at the hardest part, because looking directly at another human being while saying the worst sentence you know is one of the more physically difficult things a nervous system can be asked to do. That's not weakness. That's just what genuine distress does to a body sitting in a chair it didn't choose to be in. She's watched hundreds of new analysts learn to spot exactly that leakage over the years, sitting in rows in a windowless training room, taking notes while she plays transcript audio and points out the half-second gaze breaks, the pitch shifts, the small defensive gestures that show up right on schedule in almost every honest account of something hard. It's reliable enough that it becomes almost boring to teach after a while. The same patterns surfacing in case after case, semester after semester, until it starts to feel less like human behavior and more like a formula the room can predict before the tape even gets there. Yours didn't do that. Or, that's not quite accurate. Let me say it the way she actually wrote it, because the imprecise version undersells what she noticed.
Recently had a tragedy in my life. Alicia.
Your hands did move, once, early on, and then stopped. like something in you made a decision, and the decision held for the rest of the interview. Your voice didn't climb. If anything, it dropped a register at the hardest part, the way a person's voice drops when they've decided a sentence needs to be said clearly rather than survived. And your eyes never left hers. Not performed eye contact. She can spot performed eye contact from across a room. It has a rehearsed evenness to it that gives it away instantly. Yours wasn't that. Yours was just present, the whole time. In a way, she says she's seen maybe a handful of times in over 2 decades of chairs like that one. For a long time, she filed it as an anomaly and moved on, the way you file a lot of things in a career built on pattern recognition. Interesting, unexplained, not urgent. It sat in a drawer, professionally speaking, for years. What brought it back out wasn't you. It was a completely unrelated case she consulted on last spring, a much more recent one, where a different witness sat in a different chair and did all the things bodies are supposed to do under that kind of weight. The leaking, the fidgeting, the eyes going elsewhere, and something about watching that ordinary, expected textbook distress made her think, almost involuntarily, of the file that never fit the textbook at all. Yours, so she pulled it back out. Reread the whole transcript this time, not just the summary she'd written for herself years ago. And the note she scrawled in the margin this week is different from the one she wrote the first time. This time it says, "Composed doesn't mean unaffected." Then, underneath that, in smaller writing, like she wasn't sure she wanted to commit to it fully, "This is what it looks like when someone has already done the hardest part of the processing somewhere else, alone, long before they ever sat down in this chair." That's the part I want to slow down on, because it's easy to hear this story and think it means you were unaffected, untouched, somehow above the moment, in a way that sounds almost inhuman. That's not what she wrote, and it's not what happened. You were affected. Anyone who's been in a chair like that knows exactly how much it costs, regardless of what your face was doing. What she's actually describing is something closer to this. Imagine grief, or fear, or the memory of something violent as a photograph that normally develops right there in the chair, in front of the interviewer. Image slowly surfacing on wet paper while everyone watches it happen in real time. Most people's photographs develop right there. Yours had already developed somewhere else, in private, long before the chair, so that by the time you sat down, all that was left to do was hand over the finished print instead of watching it come into focus in front of a stranger. That's not composure in the way people usually mean it. That's the residue of a much longer, much lonelier process that happened somewhere nobody was measuring it. Probably at 3 a.m., probably more than once, probably with no federal agent and no transcript and no one telling you that you were doing something worth noting. You did the developing in the dark, on your own time, in rooms nobody else ever saw, and the version of you that eventually sat down in that particular chair was simply further along in the process than the chair expected anyone to be. Think about what that actually requires, mechanically, not just emotionally. A photograph doesn't develop faster because you want it to. There's a fixed chemistry to it, a set amount of time the image needs sitting in the dark before it's ready to survive the light. What she's describing, whether she'd put it this way or not, is a person who found the darkroom on their own, without instructions, without anyone timing it for them, and simply stayed in it long enough, alone, for as many separate nights as it took. Nobody hands you that process. You either find the room and stay in it or you don't, and most people, understandably, don't manage it before the chair arrives. You did. Nobody was grading you on it. You just happened to already be finished by the time it counted. I keep wanting to call this strength, and I think that word undersells it slightly, so let me try to be more specific about what it actually is. Strength implies effort in the moment, gritting through something hard while it's happening. What she's describing is different. It's not effort in the chair. It's the absence of effort in the chair, because the effort had already been spent, in full, somewhere earlier, somewhere unwitnessed. The chair wasn't the hard part for you. The chair was just the paperwork. The hard part happened long before anyone handed you a badge and a room number. She mentioned the file to a colleague, mostly in passing, the way people do when something's been sitting oddly in their head for a week. The colleague asked the obvious question: is this a pattern? Does this show up in trauma survivors more broadly? Or is this just one unusually put-together person who happened to end up in a chair once? Neither of them had a clean answer. There's research on resilience, obviously, whole careers built on it, but most of it studies what happens after the fact, how people function months or years later, whether they develop certain conditions or don't, whether therapy helped or didn't. Almost none of it, she said, actually looks at what a person's face and hands are doing in the specific hour when they're handing the story to someone else for the first time. That hour doesn't usually get studied. It's too small a window, too specific a moment, to build a whole methodology around. But it's exactly the window she happened to have on file, yours. The colleague asked to read the transcript himself, which isn't unusual, except that he came back to her 3 days later instead of the same afternoon, which is. He'd run it against a comparison set. A handful of other interviews from unrelated cases, people describing comparably difficult things, none of them liars, all of them credible, all of them simply doing what bodies normally do in that chair. He wanted to know if he was imagining the difference, or if it was actually as stark on paper as it felt in the room. It wasn't imagined. He put it in terms, she said, stuck with her, more than her own note had. He said, reading the others felt like watching someone cross a finish line, all the visible effort of the run still on their face. Reading yours felt like watching someone who'd already finished the race somewhere else, arrive at the line simply to have their time recorded. That's an odd thing for two federal analysts to spend 3 days quietly comparing, over a case that closed years ago and never needed revisiting for any legal reason. Nobody required this. There was no investigation left to serve, no report due, no supervisor asking for it. It happened because something in the transcript kept pulling both of them back to it on its own, the way an unusual reading on any instrument keeps pulling a careful person back to check it again, just to be sure the first read wasn't a fluke. Here's the thing that actually matters underneath all of it. More than the transcript, more than the training seminar, more than whatever slide she eventually builds around your anonymized case. You didn't do any of that work to pass an interview. There was no chair yet when you were doing the actual developing. There was just you, at whatever hour it happened, working through something by yourself with absolutely no idea that a federal behavioral analyst would ever sit across from you one day and fail to find the marks everyone expects to find. You weren't performing readiness. You were just, by the time it counted, already further along than the room accounted for. That's worth sitting with on its own, separate from her seminar, separate from the note in the margin, separate from any 26-year-old who'll one day study your anonymized file and think they understand what they're looking at. They won't, not really. They'll see a transcript with no significant deception indicators and possibly no significant distress indicators either, and they'll draw whatever conclusions their training tells them to draw. What they won't see, what doesn't fit into any margin note, is the actual hour that produced it, not the one in the federal building, the earlier one, the real one, the one that happened without a badge or a transcript, or anyone in the room to notice that something enormous was quietly being handled. She'll probably keep the file in rotation for a few more years, pulling it out whenever a new group needs to see what genuine composure actually looks like instead of the performed kind. She still doesn't have a name for it that she's fully satisfied with. The margin note this week, called it already developed. Maybe next year she'll cross that out too and write something else, closer to whatever the real word is for a person who did the hardest work of their life, somewhere completely unwitnessed, and then simply showed up to hand over the result. There's a version of you, somewhere back in the years before that chair existed, who had no idea any of this was coming. No federal building yet, no case number, just an ordinary stretch of nights where something enormous had to get carried, alone, without a name for what was happening, or a framework for how long it would take, or any promise that it would ever amount to anything other than more nights exactly like it. That version of you wasn't building toward a transcript, wasn't performing for a future analyst who hadn't been hired yet, was just getting through it, the unglamorous way, one specific hour at a time, with absolutely nothing guaranteeing it would ever be witnessed by anyone, let alone studied. Think about everything you had to build afterward, too, once the chair was behind you and the case had closed and nobody was writing anything down about you anymore. There's no seminar for that part. No margin note for the ordinary Tuesday 6 months later, when you had to sit in a different kind of room, a work meeting, a family dinner, a doctor's office, and function like a person whose file wasn't sitting somewhere in a federal building at all. That's its own kind of unwitnessed labor, arguably harder than the interview itself, because at least the interview had a clear beginning and end. The years after don't. You just kept going, one unremarkable day layered on the next, with no one checking in to see whether the composure from that one afternoon had held, whether it was costing you something quietly in the background that nobody thought to ask about. It's strange to think that the actual proof of what that cost you doesn't live in the part anyone can see. It's not in how you carry yourself now, not in whatever version of composed you've learned to present in rooms that ask something of you. It lives instead in a negative space, in the fact that a room full of new analysts will be shown your file specifically because of what's absent from it, the leakage that should be there and isn't, the marks that should show up and don't. And nobody in that seminar will ever be told the actual reason why, because the reason isn't in the transcript. The reason happened earlier, off the page, in hours nobody transcribed because nobody was there to. Make the coffee tomorrow. Sit in whatever ordinary room your day actually requires, the one with no transcript and no federal seal, and no one taking notes on what your hands are doing. You already did the part that mattered, a long time before anyone thought to write it down.